If a Colorado potato beetle grew to the size of an elephant, its need for food would increase thousands of times. One such creature could destroy a potato field in just a few hours, and entire agricultural regions within a few days. But behavior also changes with scale. Finding itself among large animals, it might orient itself by treating them as moving visual signals. And perhaps that is precisely why it would try to follow herds of zebras, perceiving them as part of a familiar movement environment. If a horsefly grew to gigantic proportions, it would become one of the most advanced aerial creatures on the planet. Its compound eyes process motion significantly faster than human vision, so even a racing car at extreme speed would appear to it as a relatively slow-moving object. Because of this, such a giant could navigate with extraordinary precision during flight and track moving targets over vast distances. At their normal size, horseflies are already considered among the best flyers in the insect world. And if one were to imagine that the limits of physics no longer applied, their speed could approach that of modern jet aircraft. If a wasp grew to gigantic proportions, its behavior would most likely remain the same. Wasps are natural builders and constantly search for materials to create and expand their nests. However, at such a scale, ordinary wood would no longer be sufficient. Glass, concrete, and metal could be perceived as new construction resources. Its powerful mandibles, which in normal life allow it to chew through wood fibers, would easily destroy the walls of buildings and elements of urban infrastructure. Perhaps that is why skyscrapers would attract its attention first. And large circular structures, such as a Ferris wheel, might be perceived by a giant wasp as part of a future nest or as unusual construction material. If a spider grew to the size of a skyscraper, its appearance would become a real problem for coastal cities. Despite its enormous weight, its hollow, chitinous limbs could partially compensate for the load, allowing such a creature to move relatively confidently even in shallow waters. However, an even greater danger would be its web. Spider silk is considered one of the strongest materials in nature, surpassing steel in terms of strength-to-weight ratio. If a soldier beetle grew to the size of a multi-story building, it would become one of the most unusual giant insects on the planet. In nature, these beetles often gather in large groups and use their bright coloration as a warning to predators. Despite their intimidating appearance, soldier beetles are rarely aggressive. Most likely, the giant would continue doing what its normal-sized counterparts do, searching for food and exploring its surroundings. However, each of its steps would generate vibrations similar to a small earthquake. Interestingly, many insects use elevated structures to find mates and orient themselves in their environment. Because of this, tall structures could attract a giant beetle in the same way that trees or plant stems attract its smaller relatives. Perhaps that is why the Eiffel Tower seemed to it like the perfect place to climb. If a stick insect grew to the size of a skyscraper, its main weapon would still be not strength, but camouflage. A stick insect is unable to understand the purpose of buildings, roads, or cars. Its brain would perceive the surrounding world through simple shapes, outlines, and silhouettes. Tall buildings might appear to it as giant tree trunks, while streetlights and advertising structures could resemble unusual branches. Perhaps that is why it would move calmly through the city, without even realizing the scale of destruction around it. Each of its steps would create a load comparable to the movement of heavy construction machinery. Cars and rooftops would break, not because the stick insect is attacking, but simply because it does not notice obstacles of its own size. To it, A human city would be something like a vast artificial forest. The most surprising thing is that even as a giant, the stick insect would probably still consider itself just a small insect trying to disappear among the branches of its endless forest. What if a creature from the depths of the ocean grew to the size of a city block? A jellyfish is 95% water. But at such a scale, it would no longer be a soft creature. It would be a living mass capable of filling streets like a spilled sea. Its tentacles covered in billions of stinging cells, nematocysts, in an enlarged form would function like multimeter injection systems. Every touch is not a burn. It is an injection of venom. But the most dangerous thing is not the attack. It is the very physics of its existence. It does not move through the city. It occupies it. Glass, concrete, metal, everything is destroyed not by force, but by the pressure and mass of the water it carries within itself. The city quite literally begins to behave like the ocean floor. And when it reaches transport highways, cars stop being vehicles. They become toys in water. They overturn, slide, disappear beneath its transparent mass, as if the city had suddenly been submerged under the ocean's depths. A giant snail emerges from the forest, and the forest beneath it loses its shape, sinking into a layer of slime. Snail mucus is mucin with high viscosity and hygroscopic properties. At such a scale, its movement would produce a volume of liquid comparable to a swimming pool. Every second. This is not destruction in the usual sense. The village loses its stability. Everything becomes covered in a dense organic film that slows and restricts movement. On bridges, traction begins to fail. Cars slip and sink into the viscous mass as if it were a liquid medium. In the city, streets turn into corridors of slime. Buildings are gradually coated in mucin, and space itself loses its solidity. And yet, from a scientific perspective, this substance is unique. Mucin can be used as a biomaterial for self-healing coatings and cement substitutes. But at this scale, it is no longer a material. It is a medium that ceases to obey humans. And then the question is not what would happen if a snail became giant, but what happens when useful nature stops being a tool. What if a creature lived beneath our cities, capable of digging faster than any machine? A giant mole cricket. Its front limbs are a perfect digging instrument. The pressure it exerts on the soil is comparable to an industrial tunnel boring machine. It does not destroy the metro system. It rewrites it. And if it were to carve out a tunnel, we would get a new metro line. No budget, but with the risk of collapsing everything built above it. What if a subterranean nightmare grew to the size of a city? A giant centipede crawls into the urban blocks. Its body moves in waves. It does not go around buildings. It flows through them. To it, the city is a continuous scream. Every bridge tremor, every train rumble, every traffic jam on the highway sounds like the movement of prey. Its sensitivity to vibrations turns the metropolis into hunting grounds. When it strikes a high-speed train, it is not rage. It is a blind reflex. The trembling of the rails is, to it, what a worm in the soil once was. Its mandibles pierce metal. But the real horror is not the destroyed carriage. The terrifying part is that its path cannot be predicted. It moves from bridge to overpass, from rooftop into tunnel, throwing tons of weight into places the city was never designed to withstand. What if an innocent nighttime moth grew to the size of an airplane? It flies over the city, and pollen like dust falls from its wings, covering the streets in a dense fog. But this is not just pollen. It is a cloud of microscopic scales with high reflectivity. They scatter light and blind cameras, sensors, and navigation systems. the city loses its sight. When helicopters arrive, it only gets worse. The scales clog air intakes, and engines begin to fail. The moth is not attacking, it is simply flying. And its mere presence is enough to cause the surrounding technology to start dying. A frog is not an insect, but its abilities make it one of the most efficient hunters in nature. If it grew to the size of a multi-story building, each of its jumps would be comparable to the impact of a small meteorite. The landing of such a creature would generate a shock wave capable of damaging buildings and infrastructure hundreds of meters away. Thanks to its powerful hind legs, a giant frog could cover enormous distances in a single leap, barely noticing cities, rivers, or even coastlines. And when it landed in water, it would create waves resembling a localized tsunami. But the most remarkable feature would still be its tongue. In nature, a frog's tongue shoots out so quickly that its prey often has no time to understand what happened. If such a giant frog spotted a launching rocket and mistook it for a large insect, its hunting instinct could be triggered faster than any automated system at a spaceport. Earthworms are considered some of the most beneficial creatures for the soil. They loosen the ground and enrich it with nutrients. But if an earthworm grew to the size of a train, the consequences would be very different. As it moved underground, it would create enormous tunnels, causing roads and buildings to literally collapse into the ground. In the desert, its movement would leave behind massive furrows and towering sand mounds. Perhaps a single worm of that size could reshape the landscape of an entire region in just a few years.
Hi guys, what do you think? Would we survive in a world like this? Drop a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe to Paradox Pantry. More is coming.